We're joined on the line now by Alex Krainer. Where are you, Alex, by the way? I hope you're there.
I'm in Monaco.
Brilliant.
The usual.
Okay, so you are a former hedge fund manager. You also, can we just maybe start by you saying something a little bit about your book about the Magnitsky Act? And this is extremely significant because it's the beginnings, really, I think, in a big way, of the economic and financial firewall that was being put down between East and West, or particularly between Russia and other European countries and Western countries generally. So can you just tell us a little bit about what made you, what the title of the book is, and what really got your goat enough to actually want to go and write that book?
Okay. First of all, Tony, good to join you again. Thank you for the invite. And I'm very, very happy to hear that you understood that the Magnitsky Act has nothing to do with human rights or any such other nonsense, but it's simply a legal and financial firewall between the West and Russia. Why? Because during the 1990s, during the so-called transition that Russia underwent from communism to capitalism, Western financial interests ran a veritable pirate raid against Russia, and they plundered billions of dollars in Russia's wealth. And so I, through my through my line of business, I never had any kind of investment in Russia. I never did any investing in Russia. I was always purely a commodities trader. But, Russia is kind of relevant from the point of view that, if there's harsh winter in Russia, it might affect oil prices. Russia is a large exporter of oil and gas and wheat and such things. So it's kind of relevant to keep on the radar through the news flow. So I came to know this man called Bill. His name is Bill Browder. I met him on 2 occasions in Monaco, and I knew that he ran the largest foreign-owned hedge fund in Russia. The company was named Hermitage Capital Management, and he, at the time, he appeared like a normal fund manager investing in Russia. I met him first time in 2005, and he got my attention because he was the first person I ever heard say anything positive about Vladimir Putin. And this kind of got my attention because he was talking real things. He wasn't talking that Vladimir Putin spoke languages and dressed nicely. He was saying, my company does deep investigations into corruption going on in Russia, and then we publish the results of our investigations in financial press. And every time Vladimir Putin's government comes in and cleans up, they change the laws, they close the loopholes, they fire the corrupt management. And he discovered a good business model this way, because they would acquire shares of Russian companies that were very, very undervalued due to corruption. Then they would expose the corruption. Vladimir Putin's government would clean up, and then the shares of the company would go up 5 times, 10 times, and so forth. So Bill Browder made a big fortune. And it wasn't the only game he was playing there. But what happens? 5 years later, in 2010, Bill Browder is in Monaco again, and this time the story is completely different. So this time he's speaking against Vladimir Putin. He's advising people not to invest 1 penny in Russia. And so he changed his tack 180 degrees. I thought, okay, well, that's interesting. What happened? Turns out he was kicked out of Russia over tax evasion. And in 2015, he published a book called Red Notice, which was my own conviction, ghost-written by Lee Child. And it turned into like an international bestseller because it was as far as spy thrillers go, it was a very well-written book. The problem is that it's fiction. Practically nothing in there is true. And then, this was exactly the narrative that Bill Browder had used to lobby the Magnitsky legislation through the U.S. Congress in 2012. And the thing about Magnitsky legislation is, so this was called Magnitsky Act of 2012. The thing about that legislation is that it is deemed to be the opening salvo of the new Cold War between Russia and the West. So this is where everything cooked up. And once I read Bill Browder's book, I understood that he wasn't just some hedge fund manager doing business in Russia. I understood that he was a part of a large large international network that comprises top of the banking cartel and the intelligence agencies like MI6 and CIA. And among his banking partners were Edmond Safra, who died here in Monaco in 1999. And whose Republic National Bank of New York was then absorbed into HSBC, which is Bill Browder's current partner or employer or sponsor, I don't know which. And so Bill Browder from 2012 has turned into the world's most relentless and most prolific demonizer on Russia. He is the world's go-to expert on Vladimir Putin's corruption. And he has continued to lobby for this Magnitsky legislation, and he has been able to pass it in 30 different countries around the world. And as you correctly said, this is simply a firewall between Russian legal and financial system and that of the West, because they want to prevent Russians to investigate the plunder and the theft of Russian assets that has taken place during the 1990s. So, having understood these things and having understood that this powerful network that Bill Browder was fronting from was pushing us straight into World War III, I thought somebody needs to expose this. Somebody needs to out these people. And then, I thought, well, maybe I know a little bit more about this than your average person on the street. Yeah. So I thought, may as well be me. So that's how I decided to write that book, because I have lived once through the outbreak of war in former Yugoslavia. Yeah. I'm a Croatian national. Yeah. I know what happens when countries go to war. It's unthinkable. And I thought at the very least, I have to add my voice to the anti-war cause and try to avert the slow but relentless sleepwalk into World War III. Yeah. So that's how my book came about. And then 5 years after I self-published it on Amazon, 5 weeks, right? Amazon canceled me. They canceled the book. They deleted it from their page, from their catalog. And the reason is because a man called Jonathan Weiner, who is, the epitome of the deep state swamp creature from Washington, D.C. He used to be advisor to John Kerry when John Kerry was Secretary of State under Obama. And one letter from Jonathan Weiner to Amazon was enough to make my book disappeared. And then the book was republished by a proper publisher called Red Pill Press, who spent 9 months combing through the book to make sure that there's nothing there that they could get sued for. And then the book was banned again 6 weeks after it was published. So obviously, whatever's in that book, they're very keen that you don't learn about it.
Okay, well, just remind us of the title and where you can get it now.
It's the title is Grand Deception. The truth about Magnitsky Act, the truth about Bill Browder, the Magnitsky Act, and anti-Russian sanctions. And it's available on the pages of Red Pill Press. That's redpillpress.com.
Okay, well, bless you for doing all that, Alex, and a marvelous sentiment behind, particularly someone that's lived through that whole horrific Yugoslav conflict.
Yes.
Anyway, we're going to go now and have a little listen to a certain Vladimir Putin speaking yesterday. He spoke a few days ago, I think. But anyway, it was live last night. We were sitting at home, sort of half watching the BBC Question Time with a whole bunch of very boring panellists, trotting through the same old usual rubbish and nonsense, and being guided in their inanity by the chief presenter of the Antiques Roadshow, who somehow is now in charge of the BBC's flagship TV current affairs programme. So just switched us watching the pictures, but we had it going at the top, the sound from Tucker Carlson talking to Putin. One of the things he said in a very, very simple, basic way, Alex, was that we have no quarrel with the Americans whatsoever, but there are certain people in Washington, D.C. that are not our friends. And he was pointing out that actually Russia was part of the settling of Alaska. It was also part of. It's quite a lot of historical stuff in there, and also the settling of Hawaii. But these people in D.C., Alex, are certainly not our friends. He said. So just tell us what you make of. Maybe you could. I'm going to play a clip in a minute, but what you make of this whole phenomenon of Tucker Carlson being over in Moscow.
I think that, well, it's wonderful. It was exactly last Saturday, so it was 6 days ago, that a friend called me up from Moscow. He said, like, oh, you're never going to guess who I had a chat with. It was Tucker Carlson. So I knew from Saturday morning that Tucker Carlson was in Moscow. And I was sure that he was there. He wouldn't say why he was there, but I was sure he was there to interview Vladimir Putin. And so now we know. And I think that's absolutely wonderful. And you can tell by the reaction of the officialdom in Europe and in the United States that they're going absolutely berserk about it. There's heads exploding. And, every time these people are upset, I reckon something good has happened. And I think that the reason why this is very good is because it challenges their narrative control. They are really, really keen on us not hearing from Vladimir Putin unfiltered in his own words, because they have been trying to cast him into a role of the boogeyman, the villain, that we have to somehow get rid of since 2003. Ever since he slammed the Rothschild agent Mikhail Khodorkovsky in prison, the West has been very, very keen on getting rid of Putin. And so he's been cast into the role of the villain, and Western press has been relentlessly demonizing him practically every day since 2003, so going on 20 years.
Yeah, they certainly have.
So if people hear Vladimir Putin in his own words, unfiltered, they might think like, well, actually he sounds quite reasonable and logical, and he doesn't seem like a villainous, murderous, evil person.
No,
and
anyway.
So, that blows up a little bit the whole narrative of why we should be conscripting young men into the army and creating a new Eastern Front get everybody killed fighting Russia,
Yeah, so now they're running out of Ukrainians. They've just called for another 500,000 Ukrainians to join the army, and they're not going to get them. So they're thinking of drafting young Brits, unemployed young Brits, into the Ukrainian army.
Of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're clearly thinking about that. And I think that's extremely dangerous, Tony, because see, look what happened in Ukraine. And Ukrainians were not keen on fighting the war. After the coup in 2014, during the first elections, the extreme right-wing parties, the Svoboda Party and the right sector, in total gained 1.6% of the popular vote. So they were very fringe and very unpopular. And even in 2019, after so many years of anti-Russian hysteria that was going through not only through Ukraine media, but also through the textbook of Ukrainian schools and universities and so forth, it was the nation was flooded with Russophobia, right? And even in 2019. The Ukrainian people swept Volodymyr Zelensky into power with a 73% vote. Why? Because he was promising peace with the Eastern breakaway republics. He was promising normalization of relationship with Russia, and he was promising re-legalization of the Russian language. So even in 2019, Ukrainian people were overwhelmingly in favor of peace. And today you see that as many as 500,000 of them are now dead. And you see the neo-Nazi thugs of the Ukrainian government sweeping up men, old men, young men, boys, off the street to shove them into the trenches on the Eastern Front. They have a €300 incentive for everybody, that every warm body they can get to the front. And so, this is a lesson for us, because once this process gets going, once they get the war emergency going, once they start creating the war psychosis at home, the polarization increases, and the state apparatus that wants to perpetuate the war grows stronger, and it grows more unscrupulous, and if we're not careful, if we don't say no, if we don't say stop now, we're not interested in this, it might be our children who are going to be swept off the streets to shove into the trenches on the Eastern Front.
Yes, I think you're right.
When you see the photographs from Ukraine, with thousands of Ukrainian flags over graves of young Ukrainian men, this should be a warning to us all. Let's not mess around with this. Let's stop this in its track now.
Yeah, because in a way, what we're looking at is, what you witnessed in Yugoslavia on a massive international scale, potentially. But anyway, let's have a listen now to the interview itself. And I think one of the issues absolutely at the heart of all of this is this Ukrainian Nazi faction, which has been fostered by the United States, actually, and possibly by other NATO countries, ever since World War II. So Tucker Carlson broached this topic.
You say Hitler has been dead for so many years, 80 years. But his example lives on. People who exterminated Jews, Russians, and Poles are alive. And the president, the current president of today's Ukraine, applauds him in the Canadian Parliament, gives a standing ovation. Can we say that we have completely uprooted this ideology if what we see is happening today? That is what de-nazification is in our understanding. We have to get rid of those people who maintain this concept and support this practice and try to preserve it. That is what de-nazification is. That is what we mean.
Right. My question was a little more specific. It was, of course, not a defense of Nazis, neo or otherwise. It was a practical question. You don't control the entire country. You don't control Kiev. You don't seem like you want to. So how do you eliminate a culture or an ideology or feelings or a view of history in a country that you don't control? What do you do about that?
А вы знаете, как вам не покажется странным, в ходе переговоров в Стамбуле...
As strange as it may seem to you, during the negotiations in Istanbul, we did agree that we have it all in writing. Neo-Nazism would not be cultivated in Ukraine, including that it would be prohibited at the legislative level. Mr. Carlson, we agreed on that. This, it turns out, can be done during the negotiation process. And there's nothing humiliating for Ukraine as a modern civilized state. Is any state allowed to promote Nazism? It is not, is it? That is it.
Will there be talks, and why haven't there been talks about resolving the conflict in Ukraine? Peace talks.
Они дошли до очень высокой стадии согласования позиций, сложно.
They have been. They reached a very high stage of coordination of positions in a complex process, but still they were almost finalized. But after we withdrew our troops from Kiev, as I have already said, the other side threw away all these agreements and obeyed the instructions of Western countries, European countries, and the United States to fight Russia to the bitter end. Moreover, the president of Ukraine has legislated a ban on negotiating with Russia. He signed a decree forbidding everyone to negotiate with Russia. But how are we going to negotiate if he forbade himself and everyone to do this? We know that he is putting forward some ideas about this settlement, but in order to agree on something, we need to have a dialogue. Is that not right?
Well, but you wouldn't be speaking to the Ukrainian president, you'd be speaking to the American president. When was the last time you spoke to Joe Biden?
I cannot remember when I talked to him. I do not remember. We can look it up.
You don't remember?
No. Why? Do I have to remember everything? I have my own things to do. We have domestic political affairs.
Well, he's funding the war that you're fighting, so I would think that would be memorable.
Well, yes, he funds, but I talked to him before the special military operation, of course. And I said to him then, by the way, I will not go into details, I never do, but I said to him then, I believe that you are making a huge mistake of historic proportions by supporting everything that is happening there, in Ukraine, by pushing Russia away. I told him repeatedly, by the way. I think that would be correct if I stop here.
What did he say?
Ask him, please. It is easier for you. You are a citizen of the United States. Go and ask him. It is not appropriate for me to comment on our conversation.
But you haven't spoken to him since before February of 2022?
No, we haven't spoken. Certain contacts are being maintained, though. Speaking of which, do you remember what I told you about my proposal to work together on a missile defense system?
Yes.
You can ask all of them. All of them are safe and sound, thank God. The former president, Condoleezza, is safe and sound, and I think Mr. Gates and the current director of the intelligence agency, Mr. Burns, the then ambassador to Russia, in my opinion, are very successful ambassador. They were all witnesses to these conversations. Ask them. Same here. If you are interested in what Mr. President Biden responded to me, ask him. At any rate, I talked to him about it.
I'm definitely interested, but from the outside, it seems like this could devolve or evolve into something that brings the entire world into conflict and could initiate a nuclear launch. And so why don't you just call Biden and say, let's work this out?
What's there to work out? It's very simple. I repeat. We have contacts through various agencies. I will tell you what we are saying on this matter and what we are conveying to the U.S. leadership. If you really want to stop fighting, you need to stop supplying weapons. It will be over within a few weeks. That's it. And then we can agree on some terms. Before you do that, stop. What's easier? Why would I call him? What should I talk to him about? Or beg him for what?
And what messages do you get back?
You're going to deliver such and such weapons to Ukraine? Oh, I'm afraid, please don't. What is there to talk about?
Do you think NATO is worried about this becoming a global war or a nuclear conflict?
At least that's what they're talking about. And they're trying to intimidate their own population with an imaginary Russian threat. This is an obvious fact. And thinking people, not Philistines, but thinking people, analysts, those who are engaged in real politics, just smart people understand perfectly well that this is a fake. They're trying to fuel the Russian threat.
So that's Tucker Carlson interviewing Russian President Vladimir Putin, broadcast on X and various other platforms yesterday evening. I think I watched it on vk.com, which is a kind of Russian version of Facebook. But Alex, what did you make of the interview? Is there anything that's either there or any other things you heard that stood out to you? I remember also another thing he talks about. He goes into some real detail about how Boris Johnson flew over whilst he was British Prime Minister to stop the peace talks, basically to persuade or strong-arm Zelensky into simply walking away from those peace talks when the Russians had literally just pulled out of Kiev. away from the area. It looked as if everything was going to calm down. There was going to be peace back in 2022.
Yes, and that's a very, very important moment in the war, because the Russians, when they initiated the special military operation nearly 2 years ago, the Russians almost immediately started to have talks with Kiev, with the Ukrainian government, and these talks over the next 3 weeks reached a very important milestone. They formulated a peace plan. It was initialed. It was ready to be signed, and it was mediated by the Turks. And then it's true, Boris Johnson flew unannounced into Kiev to persuade Vladimir Zelensky to renege, to walk away from the deal, and to fight the war, because, the West is fully behind them. They're going to get everything they need. They're going to beat Russia militarily and so forth. And so that's what happened. That's how the next 500,000 Ukrainian people died, and Ukraine ended up completely devastated and destroyed. But at that point, Vladimir Putin had no territorial demands whatsoever. So he wasn't about to give back Crimea, but the Donbas was going to remain in as part of Ukraine. And he demanded that Ukraine be neutral, that they commit to not joining the NATO, and that Russia was going to completely pull out its troops from Ukraine altogether. And as a gesture of goodwill, to show that they mean that, they pulled the troops away from Kiev. So there was no Battle of Kiev like they tell us in the news. The Russians simply withdrew from Kiev to say, we're committed to this peace plan, and here we're pulling our troops away from Kiev. That was on Boris Johnson. Whoever sent him there, in the media they say that Biden sent him there, but I don't know why Biden would send him there. He has Blinken, he has Nuland, he has an ambassador in Kiev, he has dozens of CIA officers in Kiev. Anybody could have done it. Why Johnson went there? That's what the British people need to be asking, because this was a very, very nefarious act on his part.
Well, let's ask Martin. Martin, who do you think may have sent him?
Well, I think he will have been...
MI6? Chatham House?
He will have been keen to don't forget his position inside British politics was extremely precarious at this point, and he's a notoriously egotistical and narcissistic personality. So the idea of him going to read the riot act to Zelensky.
Who sent him?
I'm coming to that. I think he would certainly not have gone without the agreement of the American leadership, and it's not necessarily Biden, because Biden isn't even the American leader, is he? I mean, is he in charge? I think most people think he isn't, but somebody is.
Who is at the apex of this Anglo-Zionist empire here? They are the people that sent him, aren't they?
Well, I would agree they are, but you wouldn't necessarily. I mean, why would I know the exact names of those people?
Well, I'm not asking.
The deep state in the US.
Give us a hand, anyway. Come on, Martin. I say MI6. What do you say?
MI6 have played a very nefarious role in all of this. The Russians certainly perceived them as being more belligerent than the Americans.
Okay, Alex.
Can I ask a question, gentlemen? Maybe you know the answer to this. At the outset of war in Ukraine, allegedly, there was a letter drafted by Nathaniel Rothschild to British MPs urging them to come to the aid of Ukraine, to help arm Ukraine, to help fight the war, blah, 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 all these things. Are you guys aware of this letter, and do you know whether it's a real letter or whether this is a hoax?
I certainly don't. I certainly remember reading that this was a close. Hang on. I think there's a Reuters thing saying fabricated letter about Ukraine and Putin attributed to Nat Rothschild. That was March 2022 on Reuters. But then, of course, these things can be fact-checked out of existence, even though they're real. So nothing deceives like a document. So we don't really know.
I don't know either, so I put my hand up.
If we talk about who's at the top of the pyramid, there is that wonderful photograph of Jacob Rothschild standing next to Boris Johnson in front of his manor, not Boris Johnson's manor, the Jacob Rothschild's manor, right? He's the one with the money. And as Napoleon Bonaparte said, when the politicians are dependent on bankers for money, it is the bankers who formulate the policy, not the politicians. So I'll leave it there, and maybe, maybe people can reach their own conclusion.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I'll put a link up to the some evidence, if there is any, of this being real, but then it's the sort of thing that might be deliberately fabricated as a kind of straw man argument that can then be torn down, Alex.
As a straw man argument, there hasn't been an argument about this. It just vanished. So it hasn't been an argument, and I haven't heard anybody trying to trace the command and control hierarchy to those levels. So if it was meant to be a straw man or a red herring, it was completely ineffective. It just disappeared.
So, I mean, surely Jacob Rothschild is a banker. Nat Rothschild, his son, I think, isn't he? Who was at Oxford in the Bullingdon Club with David Cameron, with who else was it? George Osborne, a whole load of other people. Boris Johnson,
Radek Sikorsky.
Boris Johnson.
Radek Sikorsky was Boris Johnson's friend, and Radek Sikorsky is eyeballs deep in Ukraine's coup, in organization of Ukraine's coup in 2014, and he's currently the foreign minister of Poland. So, he became the British subject, he became member of the Bullingdon Club, recruited by Boris Johnson into the Bullingdon Club, and then practically as soon as he was done with Oxford, he went back to Poland, got his Polish citizenship back, and his political career took off like a rocket. Yeah? So, lots of dots to join up there.
Yeah, well, anyway, thanks for starting that little discussion. But look, we're going to have another clip now, not so long this time, but this is where Tucker Carlson asked Vladimir Putin a bit about AI and Elon Musk, and also about Evan Dershowitz, who's in a Russian prison, I believe is a US journalist.
Mankind is currently facing many threats. Due to the genetic researches, it is now possible to create a superhuman, a specialized human being, a genetically engineered athlete, scientist, military man. There are reports that Elon Musk had already had a chip implanted in the human brain in the USA.
What do you think of that?
Well, I think there's no stopping Elon Musk. He will do as he sees fit. Nevertheless, you need to find some common ground with him, search for ways to persuade him. I think he's a smart person, I truly believe he is. So you need to reach an agreement with him, because this process needs to be formalized and subjected to certain rules. Humanity has to consider what is going to happen due to the newest development in genetics or in AI. One can make an approximate prediction of what will happen. Once mankind felt an existential threat coming from nuclear weapons, all nuclear nations began to come to terms with one another, since they realized the negligent use of nuclear weaponry could drive humanity to extinction. It is impossible to stop research in genetics or AI today, just as it was impossible to stop the use of gunpowder back in the day. But as soon as we realize that the threat comes from unbridled and uncontrolled development of AI, or genetics, or any other field, the time will come to reach an international agreement on how to regulate these things.
I appreciate all the time you've given us. I just got to ask you one last question, and that's about someone who's very famous in the United States, probably not here, Evan Dershowitz, who's the Wall Street Journal reporter. He's 32, and he's been in prison for almost a year. This is a huge story in the United States, and I just want to ask you directly, without getting into the details of it or your version of what happened, if as a sign of your decency, you would be willing to release him to us and we'll bring him back to the United States.
Мы столько сделали жестов доброй воли, что, мне кажется, мы исчерпали всю линию.
We have done so many gestures of goodwill out of decency that I think we have run out of them.
Ни разу не ответил. Но
we have never seen anyone reciprocate to us in a similar manner.
что мы
However, in theory, we can say that we do not rule out that we can do that
исключаем того, что мы можем это
if our
сделать
partners take reciprocal steps.
в встречном движении со стороны наших.
When I talk about the partners, I first of all refer to special services.
Представителей специальных служб.
Special services are in contact with one another. They are talking about the matter in question.
На то, чтобы не решить это.
There is no taboo to settle this issue. We are willing to solve it.
Есть определенные условия, которые
But there are certain terms being discussed via special services
по
channels.
партнерским каналам между спецслужбами.
I believe an agreement can be reached.
Yeah, so that's another clip. Maybe you could just tell us what you make of those two particular issues. I think it was quite wonderful to see Tucker putting it on him, a surprise question, which seemed to kind of slightly destabilise Putin, saying, look, just hand this guy over to us. We can go home with him, the journalist. And also, of course, looking at this incredible subject of AI, which is Putin quite rightly is comparing to the idea of trying to uninvent gunpowder, Alex.
Well, with regards to AI, I have to try to demystify it a little bit because I have spent a good chunk of my life in AI development. I managed an AI development program for many years. And so I'm familiar with the concept down to the ones and zeros. AI can be a wonderful thing, but it is a very, very difficult thing. It's very challenging. And it's only as good as the way you design it and build it and maintain it. We have to separate this from what we think we understood through science fiction movies. Don't imagine that we're going to have a Skynet and Terminators killing people around and doing whatnot. Any AI system, any software system can only function according to very narrow specifications. It's designed around specific requirements. It can do very specific things. It can never, it doesn't possess its own intelligence, right? It only has a knowledge base, and it only has a large amount of data that it can reference between what it receives from the outside world and what is in its knowledge base, so that it can discern patterns and that it can interpret things like words, sentences, objects, and so forth.
Yeah, well, so I've had similar thoughts, or not just my thoughts, but from top people in the Journalists Union over the years, chatting to them about this, saying, well, really, AI doesn't exist, and really what it is, it's an excuse for if a system is programmed, say, for example, to kill people, which allegedly it has been used in Ukraine and in Libya, places like that, to kill people, linking up satellites with weapon systems and then just saying, well, go and kill what you want, basically. So the idea is to try and personalise it in order to excuse the people who are relinquishing any responsibility over the deaths that they're causing using such a system. Yes. But anyway, so I don't think, I think...
there's a lot of psyops patched over all of these stories, because they... military powers try to make themselves look more sophisticated and more powerful than they really are. So they like to flaunt weapons, imaginary weapons that they don't really have. And so this could be the case of this, but I can tell you a story when, the United States had this drone assassination program, and they had a massive challenge because it turned out that the pilots didn't like killing people they didn't know for reasons that they didn't understand. And so they had a massive turnover of the pilots. And then Google stepped in and launched this Operation Maven with the Pentagon, where they were going to create AI tools and programs to replace these pilots so that AI could go around killing people from drones. Well, guess what? There was like a rebellion at Google, like their top engineers quit, and 4,000 Google employees signed a petition saying, like, we want you to discontinue Project Maven, and we want you to not work with the U.S. Defense Department. And then the Tech Workers Association of America, something like this, made a bigger petition, more people, that they demanded not just Google, but also IBM and Amazon and some other large tech firms to not work with the U.S. Defense Department, to not weaponize software technology. And so, you also have the problem of people's willingness to create those systems. And those systems, believe me, those systems do not maintain themselves. It is enough for a software programmer not to properly document the code that they're writing, and very likely the next software developer who takes the charge of the will have no idea what they're dealing with.
Yeah, so what's your assessment of the extent to which this has been deployed? I mean, I remember reading I think it was 2022 Christmas in the Times, about the Palantir system being tested as a form of, well, they called it AI, but really we're talking here just about a computerized kill system in eastern Ukraine being deployed by the United States and the Ukrainians.
Yes, I don't know what it is. I really don't know what it is, but I think it shouldn't be called AI. It should probably be called technological software-based tools for killing people. So instead of having a person doing that, you have a computer with a sensor it's not really AI. It's not like Skynet, some robot takes off like Arnold Schwarzenegger and then pursues Sarah Connor forever and is unstoppable. There's nothing like that. This is just like a computerized, advanced, satellite-based, sensor-based, software-based means of killing, which is just an alternative to a trained assassin going to kill somebody. There's no greater mystery to it than that.
Okay, well, I think and one of the most interesting questions Tucker asked Putin this week was about the non-violent. He was saying, look, hang on, you're supposed to be an Orthodox Christian country. How do you square that with this non-violent approach of Christ? This turn the other cheek kind of thing. Then he also asked him a really, I thought, brilliant question about, do you believe in the supernatural? Do you believe that God intervenes?
Christianity is specifically a non-violent religion. Jesus says, turn the other cheek, don't kill. How can a leader who has to kill, of any country, how can a leader be a Christian? How do you reconcile that to yourself?
Очень легко. Если речь идет о защите себя и своей семьи.
It is very easy. When it comes to protecting oneself and one's family, one's homeland, we won't attack anyone. When did the developments in Ukraine start? Since the coup d'etat and the hostilities in Donbass began, that's when they started. And we're protecting our people, ourselves, our homeland, and our future. As for religion in general, it's not about external manifestations. It's not about going to church every day or banging your head on the floor. It is in the heart. And our culture is so human-oriented. Dostoevsky, who was very well known in the West and the genius of Russian culture, Russian literature, spoke a lot about this, about the Russian soul. After all, Western society is more pragmatic. Russian people think more about the eternal, about moral values. I don't know, maybe you won't agree with me, but Western culture is more pragmatic after all. I'm not saying this is bad. It makes it possible for today's golden billion to achieve good success in production, even in science and so on. There's nothing wrong with that. I'm just saying that we kind of look the same, but our minds are built.
So do you see the supernatural at work as you look out across what's happening in the world now? Do you see God at work? Do you ever think to yourself, these are forces that are not human?
Да нет, я, честно говоря, так не думаю. Я думаю о том, что...
No, to be honest, I don't think so.
развивается вот по своим внутренним...
My opinion is that the development of the world community is in accordance with the inherent laws, and those laws are what they are.
Так было всегда в истории человечества.
It's always been this way in the history of mankind. Some nations and countries rose, became stronger and more numerous, and then left the international stage, losing the status they had accustomed to. There's probably no need for me to give examples, but we could start with the Genghis Khan and horde conquerors, the Golden Horde, and then end with the Roman Empire. It seems that there has never been anything like the Roman Empire in the history of mankind. Nevertheless, the potential of the barbarians gradually grew, as did their population. In general, the barbarians were getting stronger and begun to develop economically, as we would say today. This eventually led to the collapse of the Roman Empire and the regime imposed by the Romans. However, it took 5 centuries for the Roman Empire to fall apart. The difference with what is happening now is that all the processes of change are happening at a much faster pace than in Roman times.
Yeah, not half. Alex, what do you make of that? He's talking there particularly about the sort of spiritual side of this, the Russian soul, and also this idea of, I don't expect God to come in and help us, but he's maybe somewhere hanging around, and he's certainly giving us the morals behind what we do.
Well, I think that Tucker Carlson's question here was a little bit awkward, or maybe he should have formulated it a little bit better, because, it's obvious that, take Christianity in Europe, for example. European civilization has wiped out 6 major civilizations around the world, the Mayas, the Aztecas, the Incas, Indian, Chinese, Japanese civilization, and we are Christians, right? So this sudden idea that Christianity is a religion of peace. Well, fine, fair enough, but we haven't been very good at conducting.
Hang on, Alex, because there's layers of this, aren't there? I mean, Bush and Blair both declared themselves to be Christians. I don't think anyone believes they were.
Yeah. Yeah, well, Hitler was a Catholic. Heinrich Himmler was a Catholic. The list is very, very, very long. Francisco Franco was a Catholic. He shot a man in his face with his own gun. So, I think.
But he's making a good point, I think, about the Orthodox. He's trying to say the Orthodox tradition is very different to the Catholic, to the Protestant. We have a different tradition here, and he's obviously nailing his colours to that mast.
Yes, sure, fair enough. But I think that question didn't contribute anything. And then if you want to go deep into Christianity and Christian eschatology. We ultimately, at some level, believe in the second coming of Christ. And we know that the second coming of Christ, Christ announced that when he returns, he will not come back as a pious religious leader. He will come to wage war and judge. That's the eschatology. And so I don't see I don't see the contradiction, but I also don't see a lot of relevance in that question. I don't think we gained anything much by him asking him that question. I thought he could have used the time a little bit better.
What do you think is going to be? How's this going to go? The conflict in Ukraine. It's at a bit of a stalemate, as we heard in the first clip.
No, it's not remotely at a stalemate. Ukraine's getting pummeled.
Well, what I'm saying is that it's not going anywhere right now. They're trying to get more troops on the Ukrainian side. The Russians have really kind of won, but there is always the potential. This is a bit like the whole situation in the Donbass. It's bubbling away. It's fermenting there, and it's a potential flashpoint, just as the Middle East is, but particularly focusing on Ukraine. Where do you think it's heading?
It's heading for Ukraine's total defeat and Russia imposing its terms of armistice. And, the idea of stalemate, like it's not moving anywhere. Westerners easily fall into this error because they think that progress means change in the shape of the map, that the colors on the map have got to be moving. Remember, for weeks now, Ukrainians have been losing an average of 1,200 soldiers a day. They have no troops left. They're running out of troops. They're running out of munitions. It's game over. These are the last pangs of the agony of Ukraine, and it's coming very close to an end. So I think it ends in an armistice where Russia is going to dictate the terms of peace. It's going to be an utter catastrophe for Western powers, not necessarily for people in the West, not for you and me necessarily, but for the entrenched establishment in London, in Brussels, in Paris, in Berlin, and so forth. It's going to be a catastrophe for them. It's going to be a catastrophe for the European and American financial system, because they're going to lose last hope of securing the collateral that is, Eastern Russia, and their hope of securing Russian proper. Oh, no, sorry, not Eastern Russia, Eastern Ukraine, and the collateral of Russia proper. And so it's going to be an epic defeat for the West.
Also, I think it'd be useful to hear your views on whether you think there's any connection between and if so, what it is, between the genocide going on in Gaza and in the Ukraine conflict.
I do believe so, actually, Tony, because I am one of those people who's convinced that 7 October was a false flag operation. Now, people jump on this because they think I'm implying that the Israeli leadership orchestrated it. That's not how false flag operations work. Usually you have a very small group within the intelligence agencies who orchestrate this, and they basically ambush the political leadership into taking some kind of an action. And I think that the hope here was that if you, as you're losing one war, you open another one. You try to destabilize another region because you're hoping that amidst the chaos, you're going to somehow be able to weaken your rivals and somehow squeeze out some kind of a geopolitical victory for yourself. I think it didn't work, but it did result with an awful lot of bloodshed in Gaza. And I personally think that Israel has inflicted a death wound on itself.
You may be right. Yeah, let's just have a listen to quickly a short clip from Al Jazeera. I think this is Al Jazeera discussing the visit by Blinken and Netanyahu doubling down.
Less than a day after Hamas submitted its response to a potential Gaza ceasefire plan, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken arrived in Israel, hoping to build on that momentum. But hours after meeting with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, Israel all but rejected the current framework for a cessation of hostilities.
Now is the time for the Israeli Defense Forces to allow safe corridors for the residents of Rafah. We shall continue destroying the capabilities of Hamas until we achieve that. And I emphasize we have no other option but decisive victory.
Yeah, no option apparently, Alex.
Yes, well, if your only option is wishful thinking, then you're already lost.
Yeah, I think what's happened here is they've bitten off more than they can chew. I agree with you. It probably was a false flag and let it happen on purpose, because it looks as if they'd infiltrated Hamas enough to know what was going on. And even in the Israeli press, there's various questions being asked about what happened on the day. You know, why were so many people not where they were supposed to be, for example. But that doesn't mean that when you've done your false flag, whether it's 9/11 or what happened on October the 7th, that you then can control the consequences of your actions. And what they've done, to my mind, is they've actually brought the question of the existence of the State of Israel straight back to the international agenda where it was in the 1940s. Up to now, everybody's been talking, and even the Russians are still talking about there's going to have to be, and the Saudis and so on, there's going to have to be a settlement, two-state solution based on the 67 borders and Jerusalem as the Palestinian capital. But what they've done is they've blown that all out of the water, and it now becomes the existence of the State of Israel, just as the existence of Algérie française in the 1950s. The settlers from France had been dominating Algeria for 120 years, but they all, in the end, had to go home. And the Israelis have now backed themselves into that corner, and they're not militarily capable of defending. Because you've got the Russian Air Force in Syria, you've got the changes of tactics, and look at the way that Hezbollah are using drones and so on, just like in the Ukraine. Israeli military superiority is disintegrating. And, of course, they've actually got a very small state. It's a country the size, probably smaller than Croatia.
Final question, Alex. We've got news yesterday of another round of strikes against the Yemenis. They keep calling them Al-Nasrallah or the Houthis or whatever, but actually this is really the government of Yemen we're talking about, the US and Britain declaring war on. Is that going to go anywhere? And how and where do you think this conflict in the Middle East is which direction are we heading? It doesn't seem to me as if it's having much effect.
Yeah, I don't think it's having any very much effect, and I can't really understand why U.S. and Britain are doing it, other than maybe because the military-industrial complex has to replace all those bombs. So, somebody's making a ton of money, but there is no strategy. Houthis have withstood 8 years of bombardment with American bombs and American technology and American coordination by the Saudis. It didn't achieve anything. There's already in the early 1990s, several documents came out of the Pentagon, from the Pentagon and some American think tanks, where basically they understood that their hold on the Middle East is very much in jeopardy, and that the two pillars of their hegemony in the Middle East were a projection of power, so not power itself, projection of power, and B, their alliances, so using allies to keep the region stable. And the projection of power part means that they have to look mean and huff and puff around and scare everybody into compliance, because if they actually go to war, their weakness is going to show up. So it's preferable to have Saudis go to war, to have Jordanians go to war, and whoever. And so now both of those pillars are kind of crumbling, because their military power is showing to be ineffective, and their alliances are unraveling. Nobody wants to go along with this anymore. I mean, maybe Jordan is the last holdout, but even Jordan is now being shaken down by public protests and revolts. So I think that the end of the story is that the empire is going to have to leave the region with its tail tucked between its legs. Okay, well, just remind us of your how to follow you, best places to look for you online. Yeah, sure. Thank you. I can be found easily on X. My handle is @NakedHedgie, and I write a Substack which is called Alex Krainer's Trend Compass. Yeah. And so that should be easy to find, and from there, there's links to other platforms. And for real hardcore listeners, just remind us of the title of the book at Red Pill Press again. Yes, it's called Grand Deception, The Truth About Bill Browder, Magnitsky Act, and Anti-Russian Sanctions.
Okay, Alex Krainer from Monaco, thanks ever so much for joining us once more.
Thank you.